since 2020, there's been a massive shift in the educational system, right? One of the most significant decisions that we have to make now with all the changes is, do we send our kids to school or do we homeschool them?
My hope with this really was thinking through I wish I could say that one time we considered school and made the decision and we've never had to look back. Unfortunately, and fortunately, that's just not the case. We yearly have multiple conversations.
Oh, yearly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say it feels like it's monthly.
I said multiple,
oh, okay.
So 12.
Maybe even weekly.
I mean, we talk about school so much that you didn't even want to do an episode.
I did not. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
School.
I didn't.
We have 4 children, though. And so what I was thinking was what would be a really great resource for us as we navigate this decision-making process. You and I have now, gone down several avenues.
We have.
And
we have a high schooler. We have elementary kids, middle schoolers.
Yeah.
We have it all right now.
Except college.
We
don't have any college-age kids. So really wanting to offer through this conversation both some practical guidance, some pros and cons for the different types of schooling that we have personally engaged with, but also just giving people like a peek into the process that we have been on really the last 4 years.
Yeah,
it's
been intense the last 4 years.
Yes. Since 2020.
Since
and
2020.
I think that's true.
Since something happened in 2020 that changed the landscape of school and where we live and so many other things.
The hellish days of online schooling that convinced every single parent they could homeschool.
I can do this. I can homeschool my kids. This has to be better than this broken virtual experience that I'm having to navigate and manage as a parent now.
That was sprung on everyone.
Yeah.
So
but why don't you give a bit of backstory? Because we stumbled into a really great school experience.
We did when we were pregnant with Asher, actually. We were in a community where there was a charter school. So it was funded by the state that had been started by a group of really strong Christians, and they were implementing very biblical values just under the language of character traits, character emphasis.
Virtue.
Yes, virtues. And it was a beautiful, very unique opportunity. The kids all wore uniforms. The teachers were wonderful.
It was classical.
It was classical education. We had no idea
how good we had it.
How good we had it.
We had no idea.
So we had put our kids on that list just because parents of older kids had said, hey, this is great, but there is a wait list. You're pregnant. Put your child on the list for kindergarten.
From day one, basically, they were on that wait list.
Yes. And our 3 oldest kids went to school there. Our 3rd child, who I'm going to talk about quite a bit in this episode, because she has broken the mold for the way that I consider our education choices.
Yeah, she's been on a special education journey.
Yes. And we weren't fully aware of that for different factors, for different schooling choices.
Because it was in the middle of COVID, she was navigating kindergarten, 1st grade during that time.
Kindergarten twice. So she was in kindergarten during COVID, which may be why it
should have been the 1st grade transition, but it ended up being kindergarten twice.
She was kindergarten during COVID, and then they said, hey, let's run it back. And I was like, absolutely. So she did kindergarten again.
Yeah.
And then we moved and started homeschooling our kids. And it was during that 2020 year that, one, we did not realize what a great school that was. It was the only thing that we had ever known. So I am going to, with all humility, say that I did believe I can do this. And I read something, and I have talked about this like, oh, I read this beautiful thing and it empowered me. I have a different perspective now. Um, I came across some lies.
Empowered you to be specific, empowered you to homeschool.
And it empowered me to choose to homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that in order to be a homeschool mom, your face. Oh, I love you so much.
You can't reach me. We're
No.
too far away.
In order to be a homeschool mom, you don't have to be a teacher. You just need to be a learner. It turns out you have to learn to teach if you want to homeschool your children and keep them on trajectory with traditional education. Because another factor was that because we had stumbled upon this incredible charter school, not stumbled upon, we intentionally put our kids on the list, and that was it. The decision was made for all of our kids forever until we found out we were moving across the country to Tennessee. And I'm being specific with where we lived at these times because this decision does largely rely upon where you live and what's available to you. What's available to you within your budget, what's available. Schools go, obviously, homeschool is a bit more broad, but even with that, what homeschool communities are available? Are you going to start a homeschool community? Is your child going to be a part of an online community? So many different options. And that really is even a part of why I felt it important for us to do these episodes, because there are so many options. Mm-hmm. So for people to hear some real life experience with exploring the different options. So we were in a charter school. We loved the charter school. And then we were moving. The move even presented very little options to put our kids in a traditional school year because of the timing. We were
basically moving for 4.5 months.
Yes, and it was right at the beginning of school. So it all aligned for us to make the choice to homeschool our kids. And so we did. And it was my first time homeschooling. All of the kids were 4 different stages, which also is hilarious. Like God just pushing me in the deep end, and I don't even know how to swim, and they're sharks. And anyway, I wanted to keep going down that analogy, but I won't. It was hard. Yep. It was very challenging. We also were in a 2-bedroom apartment. Mm-hmm. The reason for so much context is because I think it'll be helpful to give a fuller picture. We also were in the process of moving, but we had not moved yet. So we're in an apartment in Colorado Springs. So our kids are still right across the street from the charter school.
Yeah. The irony. Our apartment was right across the street.
I should have just pretended like we weren't going to move, but that didn't feel right because then we would have been filling spots. Hindsight. So.
Integrity.
So we're homeschooling and it's very challenging. And then Addison and I start having conversations that we had never been positioned to have before. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I completely disagreed with how you were navigating the structure of the homeschool experience. I felt like nothing was actually happening. And I felt this need to come in and dictate structure for you. And there was a lot of tension there because you wanted it to be more organic and integrated and let the kids set the tone and let the day set the tone. And my argument was like, these kids are in no position to set the tone right now. Like they certainly can give input, but if we're relying on them to dictate the structure, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be perpetual chaos, especially with them being in 4 different seasons. And I know you had talked to some different moms and families that had done this, and just the way that they're wired and the way that they manage their family and the way that they structure their households, it was very different than the way you have primarily led the educational experience.
Yeah.
And you had been the one who had been primarily involved when it came. I would volunteer at the school, and I would help with homework and different things from time to time. But you were the one who was primarily working with the kids to make sure that they were doing what they needed to do for school. And that just kind of carried into the homeschool experience.
And also that I have had the privilege of being home with our children. So you are still working time-wise. It's just what made the most sense.
And for us at the time, navigating the expansion of an organization to a second location and moving our family and everything that comes with that. So yes, it was a chaotic time.
It was. And so throwing homeschool in the mix of that, while I'm saying this, I'm thinking we were crazy.
Yeah, it sounds crazy. Like, as we're talking about it now, like, what were we thinking?
But we were thinking we were going to be moving on to land. There was
dope.
going to be elements of homesteading, homeschooling.
I feel like so many people got that vision in 2020.
So many people.
Because I talked to pretty much everyone I talked to, like, yeah, in 2020, that's when I decided I needed some land. I needed to learn how to farm, right?
Which makes sense.
It does make sense.
And I have to believe that those seeds were sown for a reason.
100%.
Like we hadn't just had some mass hypnotism that happened to convince us all that this was the new Eden. And if you're a Christian, you need to live on land and be homeschooling your children and raising your own food. And those seeds are still there.
Yeah.
So it's this lingering, okay, God, but we did the homeschool thing. Our kids were in 6th grade, 5th grade, 2nd grade, the 1st grade, and then kindergarten. And so lots of different stages. And we were using a curriculum that would teach, and then they would go all together. All of those stages together would be taught, and then they would do their independent work.
You can say that.
Yeah.
Gather around.
And I loved the concept of that because it was going to provide so much sweet interaction, the older kids helping the younger kids, really getting to focus on a specific subject for a season. And it worked when it worked, and it didn't when it didn't.
Would you say it worked more or it didn't work more?
I think with our choice and in that season to keep our kids close to us, I have a deep conviction that even in the midst of the mess and all of the question marks around what gaps we were creating in our kids' educational journey, it was purposeful. It was purposeful to have specifically our older two who continued to homeschool. So now we homeschooled for 3 years, the older two kids, and the younger two went to traditional school this year. I think having our kids home during junior high, having our son Asher and our daughter Sophia, who are on other episodes with us, and they're great.
Yeah.
Like they are teenagers, but they are great. And we have had so much proximity with them over the last 3 years. They have had so much proximity with one another.
And we've been able to navigate the awkwardness of the middle school years in close proximity.
In very close proximity.
Which is so important. I mean, those were the worst years for me.
It is. And there is a cultural perception that those are the years when your kids want to get away from you. They want to attach to their peers, so let them. And it's not okay. And all you have to do is look around at the state of American youth in general to recognize that mentality that you just have to start letting them go out and attach to their peers during those junior high years. It's inaccurate. That is when the attachment that you have been intentional with them from birth to form needs to be strengthened and fortified, because the next stage is the stage where they're going to go out and they're going to be experiencing the world at large. And so that awkward teenage or awkward junior high, having now experienced it, and we'll be able to gather more data as our kids
Sure.
get older. But at this point, with where Asher and Sophia are, even though they do feel like we have in some areas done them a disservice by having them in homeschool environments for the junior high years.
Mainly Asher.
Yes.
Would you say? I don't feel like Sophia would say that.
Certainly mainly Asher. And we've had them in the last 2 years, we've had them in a homeschool co-op. So they have gone 2 days a week where they've been with peers, they've been in a classroom setting. And there are so many different things available now.
And the social component is very important. I mean, if you're homeschooling your kids, you have to provide that social experience.
You do, which is a lot of work.
Because I used to swear I would never homeschool my kids.
Yeah.
Like when growing up, I was never homeschooled, and I felt like homeschooled kids were the most awkward kids. And so I was against homeschooling my kids.
Yeah.
And I would say there's still an element of truth to that. I think the homeschool experience has evolved, and there are some great solutions to provide that social experience. But kids need that. They need that part of the educational dynamic that only comes into play when you're with other kids.
It's true. And something about homeschool, and I think let's just dial in on homeschool, since that's naturally where this has gone, talking through some of the pros and cons.
We're talking about Lizzie too, specifically.
Definitely. So something that I have gleaned now, being around it for 3 years, is that if you're going to choose to homeschool your kids, this is not the easier option.
But isn't school shorter, and can't you control the curriculum? And
you can, but let me reframe that. It's not the easier option once they hit junior high.
Okay.
I do think for preschool and elementary school, it, again, like my experience with that is more limited than the upper grades, which is very bizarre. I think then, because your family you're not having to go out, you're not spending hours in carpool, which did drive me crazy when my kids were in elementary school and I had tiny babies spending hours and hours in these carpool lines. And our kids were only doing half-day kindergarten, so it felt like we would drop them off and turn around and come back. But once they get to junior high and high school, the amount of involvement that you have to have as a parent, if the type of homeschool you're going to pursue, now we are only speaking from our experience because there is such a range of homeschool types, even the unschooling, which is what I thought we were going to lean towards before we realized that we do not align with our academic values. And in a lot of ways, I've submitted to Addison in that because he is the more academic oriented between the two of us.
And it's good tension. Like it's healthy tension having different primary orientations, I would say.
It definitely is.
For me, like unschooling, and I'm not as familiar with the philosophy of unschooling, but schooling and formation is a necessary part of life. And I get rejecting some of the institutional values and methods that dictate the current school experience. I get that. But what I felt like was happening is I felt like our children weren't being challenged to appreciate learning.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't a sustained trajectory that was causing them to develop the muscles, the learning muscles, because at the end of the day, learning how to learn is what is important.
Yeah.
Because we're in a world where things are changing constantly. Technology is introducing possibilities that were previously unavailable to us, but having that love for learning and having a dedication to the learning process, that's the thing that I wanted to instill in our children. And I just saw a lot of relational friction and frustration between you and the children. And that for me was the thing. I was like, this is not working.
Yeah. Namely, it was me and Asher. Mm-hmm. You know, Asher is our oldest.
And you and Lizzie too.
Yeah. So he is framing a lot of our perception towards this, and he is more academically inclined and gifted. Like his gifting is in memorization and
Prose, poetry,
writing.
mathematics. He's good at these things.
He is.
Critical
He is a
thinking.
traditional academic minded individual. And so very much like his dad. So he is framing, and I just believe like God made him our oldest for a reason.
Yeah.
So whatever effect he's having on the rest of our kids, it's purposeful.
Yeah. I think what you were getting at earlier too, when you're talking about this idea of like, it's costly, it's difficult, whatever route you're choosing. And one route may be more difficult during the elementary years, less difficult middle school years. I think what all of us need to hear as parents, and we probably know this to some degree, but it's good to be reminded, like we don't get to outsource the process of discipling our children.
Yeah.
And
I want to linger there for a moment.
And the educational experience is a part of their journey of developing, of being discipled. And I think there are some people who have this idea of like, oh, well, if I just send my kids to a Christian school, a Christian private school, then they're going to be set up for life, right? They're going to be discipled. They're going to be developed. I can, families with money would send their misbehaved kids to the private school, to the Christian private school, be like, okay, that's going to fix them. And the truth is, God gave us these kids for a reason, and we don't get to outsource that. Now, we can bring people along who are going to be a part of the journey, but going back to what you shared at the very beginning, this is something that we have to continue to be sensitive to the Spirit about, and it's not a box that we check. As much as we would love to just like, hey, check a box to be done with this school debate, the reality is, and I think we're getting into this, there are pros and cons to every route. Whether it's going the private route, the public route, the homeschool route, the completely non-traditional, unconventional, unschooling route. Like there are pros and cons to each one of those. And it takes a sensitivity like to your own leanings as a parent and your own talents, your own abilities, and also the needs of your children and the place that you live. It's bringing all of and the options that affords, bringing it together in prayer and through prayer and being like, God, what do you have for me? What do you have for our children in this season? And I've seen people on the other side of the educational experience who've done all these options, one of these options, and I've seen people flourish in adulthood. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, what do they have in common? What were the things, regardless of the path that they went down, what were the things that they have in common, these people have in common that led them to being very skilled, developed adults who love God, who are passionate about their career, passionate about family? How do you get there?
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us again at Home with the Beveres, where we are so passionate about helping you create a legacy starting at home. If you haven't already, go right ahead and like and subscribe. And guys, as well, leave us a comment below, because whenever you leave a comment, it helps us curate content that can help so many other people. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time at Home with the Beveres.